Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne, inviting you to join me on this journey. There are moments when someone shares their truth so openly that it changes the way we see ourselves. For me, one of those suddenly different moments came on the 19th of May 2025, when Jacqueline Brooker spoke about living with C-PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And the way she explained it wasn't just brave, it was empowering, because in her words, I felt something mirrored. I felt seen, and I know many others did too. Jacqueline is a certified speaking professional with over 20 years' experience helping leaders and entrepreneurs claim their stage, refine their message, and grow their business through speaking. But what makes her truly stand out isn't only her strategy or expertise. It's her giant heart and her willingness to bring her full humanity to the conversation. Today, we're going to explore how the stories we often keep hidden can become the very source of our power, our resonance, and our connection. Welcome, Jacqueline. It is a privilege to have you here.
Oh, Leigh-Anne, I'm so happy to be here.
Wonderful. So let's jump in. You shared an experience with C-PTSD, and it landed suddenly different moment for me. And I imagine for many others it did too. Can you take us to what it was like for you to make the decision to share it so openly?
Yeah, I find this so interesting. I quite often don't think in advance about what I'm going to say or how I'm going to say it. I sometimes wake up with words. And usually when it's something from my personal experience, I know very much that it's meant to be something I'm meant to put in the world. It's not for me. So if I wake up with words that I journal, that's different. But if I wake up with words that I feel compelled to put into the space, then I know that it's because it's not about me. And so I did take my time with it. So I did let it sit and I did, work it through and make sure it was, no sense of, I guess, therapy from stage with it. That was definitely from a place of strength, power, and grace. So I did probably take about a week to put it together. And I remember being very mindful of that because of the time that I was putting it up. It was mental health awareness. And so I was very aware and conscious of that time. But it's also one of those things, if we don't speak about it, who does? I live in a world where it's all about sharing story and experience and perspective. And I live in a world where I also lost control of the narrative in 2016. And I'm very, very passionate about actually people understanding that CPTSD is not just the depressive sort. It's not just the non-functional sort. And some of the things that people get challenged with when they're closer to me or in my circle or are the things that are actually a result of that. So I just felt like it was something we needed to start talking about. There was no grand plan. There was no amazing thing behind the decision. It was just like, oh, I have these words and they're sounding really good. I know there's no therapy in them. I should probably get them out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the way that you really considered that. And it wasn't a marketing ploy. It wasn't attention seeking. There wasn't any agenda apart from generosity and community support. Because when our leaders are willing to share their humanity, we are truly being led.
Yeah.
Right.
And I agree and disagree with that. And that's only because of what we see happening in culture. And what I mean by that is there is a very big push to be vulnerable and real and raw, but our leaders actually need to do it with strength and compassion and not just vulnerability and rawness and realness, because we have the responsibility of shepherding a group of people around us, right? And we have to hold that space. We have to hold that responsibility, and we have to hold that responsibility lightly. And I think we have to hold our words tightly.
Yes, well said. So when we hear someone name what we've been struggling with silently, it creates this deep sense of recognition. So it really did in me. How have you experienced that ripple effect of others feeling seen through your story? Have you had other feedback?
Yeah, look, it's not the first time. I mean, I don't share all the time, and that's why I think it takes people by surprise when I do speak into things. And I have some very big stories, incredibly big stories. And when I do share them, it's quite incredible to me How many people see themselves in it? And I think it's because I've learned across the years that the real and raw movement is not suited to me. Right. I won't speak into something until I can do so with strength, power, and grace. And not because I want to be seen as a superhero, but because I want to do it in such a way that people can lean into it. And they can't if you're incredibly emotional. I don't want somebody sitting in a ditch with me. I want somebody going, I feel seen. And there's a difference in that, right? So sitting in a ditch with me is someone saying, oh, I like you. And it's being seen by me is she is like me, right? So it's a really important distinction. And it always surprises me. It always really surprises me whether I'm speaking on stage and platform, because for 7 or 8 years, I only spoke about resilience, and there was a lot of my story in that. And so it always surprises me. Every time it happens, it reinforces for me that I actually have to take this with a regard and a regard for what I put out there. Because if people feel seen, that's amazing. But I also have to make sure that I'm not being negligent in what I put out there at the same time. So I love that people can do that. But it's also, and Leigh-Anne, you're in my world, it's part of why I'm so passionate about people knowing how to share story, right?
Yes.
Knowing how to do it at the right time, in the right place, with the right pace, because you should be telling a story, not when it's incredibly real and raw. There's nothing wrong with that either. By the way, I'm not discounting it. I'm just talking about my preferences here. But you should be able to tell a story in a way that other people can put themselves inside it. And when you say to me, I feel seen, that's because you could put yourself inside my words, right? And so the more it happens, the more seriously I actually take the importance of how we actually tell our stories in a way that somebody else can put themselves inside it, right?
Yes.
Which also means that you've made it safe.
Yes, because sometimes we can share stories with therapy on stage, as you said before, where we are just too raw.
Yeah.
And I know that I have been guilty with that in the past in my stage journey, in my learning to speak. I thought that I had resolved the pain point and that it was pivotal to my story, but I hadn't.
No. And I've been practicing this for a long time now, right? It's not,
Yeah.
and I say to people as well, the thing that we do need to get used to with sharing of stories is understanding that sometimes the first time someone can tell a story, it will tear them apart. And that will come out as extreme emotion. It can be extreme grieving. It can be extreme crying. It can be extreme emotion. It can also be fire and anger, right? It can be a real fire and anger and heat in it. Right. And most people say, tell your story, but most people actually don't know how to actually scaffold that so the person's okay. Right. Because our first stories, like I remember being at an event about 18 months ago and they were talking about, they've set up this incredible place and women can just come and share their stories and be real and raw. And I'm like, okay, and what scaffolding have you got around them? And I actually asked them, I was on a panel with them and I actually said to them, can I ask a question? Like, yeah, sure. I'm like, if somebody comes to you and their first version of the story is pure anger and almost violence in their voice and that hatred and that heat and that sort of stuff, how do you deal with that? And they just didn't have an answer. Right. And so the same as you were saying, like you realize like the first expression of stories, like one of the first things we do with people who've got big lived experience stories is get you to say it out aloud from beginning to end, because the first expression of story can blindside you with where the emotion points actually are, can actually show you that you're not quite there yet, or can be the opposite. You can be so fiery, angry, mad that it's almost like it burns people to the ground with your words. So, so you have to kind of almost get the first version out so that the next version is safe.
Yes. Yes. So on this podcast, we talk about the pivotal moments that change everything. So what was your suddenly different moment and how did it play out in your relationships, your career, and the way you saw yourself and see
Oh my
yourself
goodness.
today?
How long have we got? It's an interesting question because getting the diagnosis of complex PTSD came in the last few years. And I remember when it was first noted by a doctor, and I remember seeing her write it down, high functioning complex PTSD, but off the charts, and as part of my referral to a psychologist. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really interesting. And like literally, like, that's really interesting. And then it was a little bit later, it was like, oh, C-PTSD is actually a thing. And then it was probably a couple of months after that I finally went, oh, that's my thing. So it wasn't like this blinding moment of recognition or acceptance or anything like that. It was just this quiet move along the thing. And some of it is because there is so many points, and that's why it's complex. So complex is more than one. And complex comes about because the original thing is not actually resolved. So you keep ending up in bad situations, making stupid decisions, having the wrong people in your life, not having boundaries. So like it just compounds, right? So if the original event is not dealt with and resolved, then it just compounds because you have no idea how to make healthy decisions and healthy boundaries and right moves. And there's some really significant points going back in my world in 2016, actually COVID in 2016, and there's an event in 2004. The first time that actually I really broke was when I was 15. So I was 15. I was at an elite boarding school. I was one of the top students. I was on my way pretty well on track to get a scholarship to go to Bond. I was determined to go to Harvard and study law, do my postgrad in law in Harvard. I had my life mapped out at the age of 14. I knew where I was going. And the events that brought me down were happening then, but they weren't interfering at that point. And when I turned 15, I was in year 11, and the events around me actually started to impact me. So there was no new events as such, but all of a sudden they interrupted. And the suddenly different was literally, it was the brightest, one of the brightest. I loved school. I loved learning. I loved being away from home because of the events that were going on. The boarding school was great for me. And then all of a sudden I just couldn't do anything. And by couldn't do anything, I meant like sitting in an exam and writing my name at the top and then just looking at the rest of it blankly and just handing it in. So like I just would look at it and think, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what to do with that. And yet I was brilliant. And so that was when I knew, well, actually, I didn't even, and this is one of the things as well, I didn't know at that point something was wrong. It was just literally an observation. I was like, wow, I can write my name on this thing, but that's it. And it was all of my subjects at the end of that semester. So they literally gave me my first grades at that end of that semester based on previous work because the school wanted to give me some breathing space to figure out what was going on. And I didn't realize that's what they were doing. And then when it happened again, the following half semester, they actually called my mother in. There was a range of meetings. They tried to get to the bottom of it, but they called in one of the elements of my drama and trauma. And therefore, when they came to me, I just shut up, right? So it became just a railroad to hell. And it's not until actually in one of our other programs, you'll hear her speak at our event coming up, is an actual neuroscientist. She's been a neuroscientist for 25 years. She's from Germany. She's in Australia. She's amazing. Actually, you met her at T-Boss.
Yeah.
And she talks about how the brain stops with too much stress and trauma. And when she was talking about it, I suddenly went, oh, that's what happened. And then because of everything that happened as a result, like I was suddenly out of school, working in a supermarket, stocking shelves. As a 15-year-old, I was homeless twice, once at 15, once at 17. I was on the streets of Brisbane and homeless at 17. There was all these things that just cascaded. But the moment that it changed was that moment, and it was suddenly different. I went from being able to have legal arguments with my legal teacher who was a barrister to not being able to answer the questions in the exam. So it was suddenly different.
So it's really interesting, Jacqueline, how it was during that teenager time that you had, whatever way your body was protecting you,
Yeah,
because it was protecting you. It was
absolutely.
attempting to save your life to prevent further damage, and it led you off. And I did a similar thing in year 11. I'd chosen subjects that I thought were the right subjects for me. They definitely were the right subjects to become an engineer, which is what I wanted to be. And I went from an straight A student to struggling. And I was also doing psychology. And I remember because I answered the psychology questions through my lens of life experience, not through the textbook answers, I failed psychology. But really it was a cry for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything that you were doing was a cry for help, just unfortunately.
I think also too though, and this is one of the big conversations I mentioned in that post you opened this conversation with. Some of the big conversations I want to have, because people say, what were you thinking? Like different things that I've done that have been really stupid. And it's like, I wasn't. So it wasn't even a cry for help, right? It was literally, so this is the thing with the neuroscience backed CPTSD, not the depression,
Yeah.
is you stop, right? It stop. Your brain snaps, it's brain snaps, right? Your brain. So it's not like people will say, what were you thinking? What was your agenda? You made that decision to, no, 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 no. I stopped. It was my brain stopping. It wasn't me crying for help even, right? If I've been crying for help, there was resources around me, right? And there was things, they were moving heaven and earth at that school to keep me in the system. I was one of their star pupils to that point. And this is what I really want people to understand is that, and this is what happens even now, like I get to a point and I just stop, or there's something I don't know how to deal with and my brain just like cuts it out, right? And it can be from the small to the really big. And so there wasn't even a cry for help. Like I didn't even understand why mum was in the office, right? I didn't understand why they were asking me questions. Like I just couldn't, there's no cognitive recognition.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest bit, I think, because especially like you've been in my world for a while, how I turn up and how I function. And so then when I do hit one of these snaps, it's so hard for people to deal with. And there's no buffer or margin because I'm normally so high performing. But it's literally now and one of the things that I wanted to speak into when I did that post was, don't assume that there's an agenda, and don't assume that there's a thought process, and don't assume there's even an unconscious cry for help, because sometimes it's actually just straight neuroscience.
Yeah.
The brain broke.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and because of my body's reaction to the COVID vaccine,
Similar impact.
do understand brain
Yeah.
brain.
Breaking.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because
Yes.
that's exactly what's happened for you, right?
Yes. Yes. And it's taken
interrupted
me
your brain.
nearly 4 years to get to the point where I can string an hour together.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
a
which is
lot.
great.
That is
Yeah.
such a lot because it
Yeah.
wasn't a minute at the beginning.
Yeah.
So I don't know, does that make me 6,000% better?
Totally. Let's just run with that.
I don't know
We'll just run
maths
with that.
anymore.
We're just yeah.
Yeah, good. So wonderfully, you said before that you speak from stage about resilience,
Yeah.
right? And I've learnt through, I think it's called the Driven program, about good resilience and bad resilience, like the soldier on resilience versus the have all the areas of your life nurtured and functioning. Right?
Yeah.
And I've lived my life in the bad one.
Yeah.
Because my self-belief about what I had to do to be acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm curious whether with your discovery through all of the myriad of training that you've done, through your self-discovery, through any coaching or therapy or anything like that, whether you've been able to see your resilience in a new way.
Yeah, look, and the first thing I want to start with is we've got to actually, when it comes to resilience, got to walk back from this one is bad and one is good, because sometimes you need to drive through, right? Sometimes you need to push through. And I find that this binary black or white, yes or no, polar opposite is actually damaging. Because to actually accept that that was who I was, and that's bad resilience, makes you previously bad, right?
Yeah.
And to actually accept that this way of doing it is good, because to be honest, there's very few humans in the world can get all their parts of their world in order. So you actually make it unattainable.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that I have argued with all the way through, is that we think it's that there's these 2 points of destination and that there's no continuum in the middle. And most people sit somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And at
Because
different
none of us have
times.
perfectly lives, and at different times, and about to go to that as well, because it's really important. And to say that the push through resilience is bad is wrong, because when we hit natural disasters, hit a suddenly different moment, we have a child who's in an accident, there's so many things where the push through is actually survival. It's not universally wrong. It's universally wrong when we stay there and we set up our dress there, right? And so, but the actual ability to push through, right, is actually one of humankind's necessary traits, right? and we need it for survival, and we need it in times of high stress, right? And setting up that we need to have all these things in order, which is building your resilience muscle, actually puts us in, can never get there. Now, if you are someone who did resilience the bad way 100% of the time, you are more than likely, as you said, self-worth is an issue, people pleasing is an issue. So if you then put this at the other end of this is where I need to get to, you're never going to get there, right? And you just replace one extreme with the other, right? And so we have to learn that this is a continuum. And one of the things that that I started speaking to, and the reason I stopped speaking about resilience in COVID, because it was like when COVID hit, everybody became a resilience expert. Like, just add water, I'm a resilience expert. And I was like, oh, I'm getting out of the noise, right? Like, I'm not interested in doing the sound bites and thought bubbles, and I'm just getting out of the noise. One of the things I had started to speak into a lot was resilience is also variable, right? So you can be the most resilient person on the planet, and you would see this in people around you, and something small happens and all of a sudden they're a mess. But they've got through everything. They've been superhuman. And then this one thing hits from left field and they can't recover. Resilience is variable. And the reason why it's so you are not just a resilient person and you're just resilient. You have a variability in your resilience. And the reason being is it's where does your self-trust sit? So if your self-trust is high in this incident that you're going into, or this experience or this scenario, you will move through it. If your self-trust is low, you'll go to the floor. And your self-trust may be high across the board. And this one small thing that hits, that takes you out, may actually be where your self-trust is low. And it's not that you're aware of, and it's not that you can go and find it, but I believe that self-trust is the variable.
That is so insightful. I
Yeah.
hadn't actually thought about it that way. And I've not heard it. So thank you.
I don't think it's generally out there. I think it's something that I'm digging into a lot more behind the scenes. So with what I'm doing for my own speaking coming, but I think it's really important for us to actually start to go and look at what is actually the variable in resilience, because it doesn't matter what we're putting in place, people are getting less and less resilient. And I think it's a lack of self-trust.
Yes, yes, yes. And I suppose with things like AI and the pace that technology is going at and the standards that we're measured against, that trust would definitely be
Variable.
on moment to moment.
Correct.
So not just day to day even. It's moment to moment. Yeah. I just love everything you've just said. And I know that your work has centered on resonance and resolve, and you've got other programs going on and mentoring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people across the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Which is phenomenal. How do you find your program helps others to be able to understand their emotions when they're speaking, and with and being able to traverse the interesting life of being a speaker, whether it be internally within your business or whether it be on stage in front of hundreds, thousands or whatever?
So the one thing that I will say, and this is why I think only about 40, to be honest, less than half the people come through our programs actually end up on a stage, but I'm okay with that, because their communication and their life changes anyway, right? Because the change is fundamental. And this is something we can't put in the brochure. Learning to speak in public and learning to do it well is one of the greatest personal development journeys you can ever go on, because you have to stare down your demons to find your voice. And then once you find your voice, the trajectory or the shifts that you have to make to actually tell a story in a way that matters to an audience and not just to you, actually means we have to get all of your ego out of the way. So it's a really interesting process. And now we've got it. And I remember when I was first doing this years and years ago, we had a 3-day program and people would end up in the fetal position on day 2, ready to walk out of the room, because having to dig into themselves was so confronting. Right? They thought they'd come together and put us through flu. And that confronting bit usually started with story, because they would walk in with stories that had nothing to do with the message or the audience. Right? So then we'd have to dig into the stories that they should be telling and all that sort of stuff. It's a really it's a really confronting journey. And that's why I think public speaking is rated so high in people's greatest fears. because it's quite confronting. It's not just about, and if I see one more Amy Cuddy power pose, I'm going to wring somebody's neck, because it's not just about, striking a pose and feeling good for 5 minutes, because that's not going to get you through. Especially if you are on a stage and you're speaking for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes, like it's daunting. A 60-minute speech has the same word count as an honours year's thesis at university, right? Let that sink in for a moment, right? And people tell me I can just wing it. Great. That's also all about you, right? So what I find is it uncovers, and our process is quite different. And what I find is it uncovers the heart of their genius and the heart of their experience. And once we do that, it's not easy because the demons still rise, especially if it's something that you've kind of forgotten about. That's actually where it's amazing. I don't mean trauma, but I mean just generally. But once we give it oxygen and space to rise, then it kind of starts to create these evidence points that you can get through whatever's coming at you. So it's an interesting pathway for everyone. And I remember in one of our other programs at the moment, we're 5 months in, and one of the women actually came into this thinking I'd stitch a few stories together and go out and grab a stage and grow my business. And she said, I had no idea it was actually going to change the woman that I am, right? And everybody walks out of our world completely purpose-driven. You've met a lot of them.
Oh, yes.
Completely purpose-driven. And they don't all come in that way. They all come in knowing they should speak, right? Or they have a story that they should tell, or they need to get their expertise wider into the world. They all know that. But they change through this process because we teach you how to tell a story well.
Yes.
And we teach you how to tell a story well. I think there's a couple of things at the heart of this. Number one, you only tell the moments that matter to an audience. You don't tell them everything. Number two, you learn how to actually be considerate of somebody else in the audience, because you're actually shaping your stories for the audience and not for you. And number three, if that story doesn't tie into a greater purpose, you learn how to let it go.
And that is a healing experience in itself. Because sometimes we do have to let it go. We don't have to tell the detail. We need to find the gem within the experience.
The insight and the wisdom is great, but sometimes that can be told with a snippet of the story. And it's one of those things where, telling story is fundamental to our survival, our nature, and everything like that. But actually learning how to slow down and speak into story really powerfully, like that's everything.
And some of the greatest speakers do that brilliantly.
They do.
And if you really think about how they strongly support the message that they're wanting to give.
Yeah.
Which, it's so vitally important.
Yeah.
So all of the people who come through your programs have their lives affected. They meet amazing people. They see mirrors.
Yeah.
And they can see their growth through seeing the other people as well, which I think is glorious. Absolutely glorious.
It is. There is no other way to describe it. It's why I stay in it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's always vulnerability in being visible with our personal stories out there. What would you say to someone listening who wonders if sharing their story, their truth, could also become a source of empowerment for them?
Well, I love this because I'm quite passionate about people telling their stories, as you know, but we have to tell them the right way. And so, people, the real and raw type thing has come out of the hero's journey story structure. And people think it's a story type. It's actually a structure. The hero's journey is a structure to pull a story together. And what people have forgotten in the real and raw movement and the just be vulnerable is the hero comes back with the elixir to share, in Joseph Campbell's words. And that means wisdom and insight. So the hero becomes the guide, right? And so if you can't share the wisdom and the insights from the experience, it is not yet time to share your story. But the minute you can share even the hint of wisdom and insight, then you can share the story. And the reason being is that it's wisdom and insight and sense making of a story that actually creates empowerment. So just telling your story real and raw with no real wisdom, insight, or that sort of thing in it, that's actually you processing out loud. That's actually you still needing sympathy, which we all do, but get that from your closest circle. Right. And that's actually you, in the worst case scenarios, you're trauma bonding your audience. Right. Yes. And I get very vocal about that. I did a whole podcast on ranting about trauma bonding your audience. And so without the wisdom and the insight or the questions that have risen or the sense making, then you're not ready to share it. But the minute you share it with that, my goodness, And that's what creates transformation. And that's like, if you want to empower, sit down and get the first version out, get the angry version, get the devastated version, get the heated version, get the first version out. And then think about, what is it that you want other people to know because of your story?
And that is why, like, it took me a very long time to be well enough to put this podcast together, but it is suddenly different. Good
Yeah.
point. Stories and strategies for when life doesn't go
Yeah.
to plan. It's not about vent.
Not at all.
Doesn't help anybody. And it is definitely not part of my calling, really.
No, not at all.
Before we close, I'd like to invite you, wherever you're listening from, to pause for a moment and reflect. What has been your suddenly different moment? The one that reshaped the way you saw yourself, your relationships, or your career, and how might naming it, even to yourself, begin to shift the way you move forward so that you can share your story, your wisdom with the next generation or the people around you, so that you are the mentor, you are the guide, and that your experience, oh, I've got tingles, your experience has longevity and legacy, which is so important. And what I take from Jacqueline's story is this: visibility isn't just about being seen on the stage. It's being about willing to let others see the truth for us, in us, and even the parts that feel fragile or hidden or hard to name. We can manage ourselves and our state and present that wisdom. Jacqueline's courage in speaking about C-PTSD and her wisdom in weaving together lived experience with leadership and coaching is a reminder that our suddenly different moments are not weaknesses, but bridges to connection, to compassion, to empowerment for ourselves and for those who are listening. That resilience is not a binary situation. That resilience is a point in time, and that we are somewhere on the scale at any one time.
Yeah.
And as long as we have self-awareness and we choose to reflect and to review our lives, we have choices. If this conversation resonates with you, hold on to this truth. You are not alone in your invisible battles, and sometimes the story you think disqualifies you is the very story that will set someone else free. I thank you so much, Jacqueline, for being on Suddenly Different today. You are
my
an
pleasure,
amazing human.
Thank you.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.